Hey, what's up, everyone? We got a new article on the website, and it's covering a new paper accompanied by this photogrammetry scan of Rano Raraku, the primary quarry on Rapa Nui that produced the vast majority of the moai on the island. Um, this photogrammetry scan is the best I've come across usage of photogrammetry so far because it gives us tremendous insight onto how the moai were carved, and it essentially confirms basic stone masonry techniques. The first thing that would be done is that a rectangle would be established to demarcate where the moai would be carved, and then they would begin to work around the stone and create the shape of the moai. And we can see hundreds of moai here in various stages of completion. And one of the things that stands out here tremendously is the ribs that are left underneath some of the moai, which are exactly the same as the rib underneath the unfinished obelisk at Aswan that is promoted by a lot of alternative researchers as being the evidence of advanced technology, when in reality, it is just a stonemasonry technique to remove a large block, whether it be an obelisk or in this case, a moai from stone. Now, this is volcanic tuff. So, the volcanic tuff is not one of the hardest stones. So the tools used to carve away the volcanic tuff was basalt. These are basalt heads that would be placed on an adze, and an adze basically would be a long stick lashed with this as the cutting tool on the edge. And they would use this to chisel away the volcanic tuff to create the shape. And in ancient Egypt, you had limestone, and they used a harder stone, diorite. And a lot of people mock this diorite pounders thing. And quite frankly, like, I remember originally thinking like that until I got into actually learning stonemasonry and understanding that this is in fact the way they did it. You have a stone of lesser hardness that is carved away with a stone of harder hardness. And that's exactly what they did here. And that's exactly what they did on in Egypt at the quarry of Aswan. The quarry of Aswan was limestone and they used diorite. Here they have volcanic tuff and they use basalt. And the finer finishing of the moai was done with obsidian. And here we see an obsidian artifact from Rapa Nui. One of the more curious and fascinating things about obsidian on the island is that this was acquired through trade with South America. Now, I didn't get into it in this article, but it is now known and confirmed through multiple vectors that the Polynesians made it to South America, acquired obsidian, acquired the sweet potato, among other things that were brought to Polynesian islands. Now, I have an ex post the other day talking about the outcropping of a stone masonry wall on Eastern Island that looked very Easter Island that looked very much Andean. And if you want to get into questioning the mainstream narrative, that's a vector to go after because the mainstream archaeologists won't acknowledge that Andean people actually made it to Rapa Nui. They in fact say that that wall was made by the Polynesians themselves. So there's something if you want to question, you can question. But this constant questioning of stonemasonry and alluding to advanced technology by isolating a single source like the unfinished obelisk and eliminating all contemporary context to it is very frustrating, and it's not fact based at all. It's just thriving on mystery and keeping the mystery going. And I don't know if these folks are willfully ignorant or knowledgeable and they're just grifting everyone. I think the bigger question would be how would we want to get into mystery? How did, you know, what is the thought process that created the same stonemasonry technique on Easter Island as in Egypt? Is that just something that humans independently thought? And this is something that I've been getting into a lot lately, like basic, human brain development, independent from one another, coming up with the same techniques for things is a fascinating concept. You know, we talk about diffusion in alternative history research, and diffusion is used to explain why a similar technique would be done across cultures and continents. Um, or is it just the human mind evolved the same exact way and developed the same exact thing? And I think that's a gray area that's worth looking at. The article itself, gets into the carving and then how they were dropped from the volcanic ridge. Here there are these post holes. Poles were put in here with ropes made out of local fibers that allowed the Moai to be lowered down to the base of this volcanic ridge. And then from here to the Ahu, the platforms, is where it gets murky. We have a recent study that replicated this walking hypothesis that's been around for a while. And, I'm not sold on this at all. In fact, I think even though they accomplished it, it doesn't make a lot of sense in totality because if it's standing upright and you then have to get it up on top of this platform, what do you do after that? And so I included some of the older hypotheses, a wooden frame and sled along wooden rollers where the moai were essentially rolled to their resting place from the base of the quarry. And this makes a lot more sense in context with other megalithic sites where ramps were made, whether they were rock or earthen, to lift the large megalithic object into a vertical position or even a horizontal position, whatever the case may be, but in this case, vertical. This is more logistically contemporary with the global megalithic structures around the world that I've seen. So I've included these in here in the article, both hypotheses, but this basically to me solves the mystery of the Moai. And being an engineer and into ancient history, my whole objective was to solve the unanswered questions. I don't like thriving on mystery. I want answers, and that's my job as an engineer is to solve problems. And here we have a plethora of evidence that essentially gives the complete picture of the construction of the Moai. The other thing I'd like to point out is this should completely devastate the geopolymer crowd because they've used the Moai as an example of geopolymer in the past. And this is just like one domino in knocking down the geopolymer crowd's grift. Every megalithic site has quarries. And this is the best example of said quarry that's ever been provided. And I want to thank the researchers for making this open source to the public, because a lot of the reason why crazy theories on the alternative side thrive is because papers and studies and things are behind paywalls, not available to the public. So, very much thanks to the group who made this open source, and everyone can see and look at this themselves. I have it embedded right here in a hyperlink in the article. So go to ancienthistoryx.com, read the article, and browse the photogrammetry scan yourself and enjoy. Thank you, and I hope to see you at ancienthistoryx.com.